friends, and welcome to the Co-Regulated Canines podcast. I'm Ashley Cipoletti, your host, and I'm on a mission to create more connection. Dogs are really just the starting point. Together, we'll explore how to live with more harmony, ease, and healing so we can show up more as the best version of ourselves, not just for our dogs, but also for our community and our planet too. So grab a coffee and let's dive in. Hey everyone, just a quick heads up before we dive in. I'm a little under the weather, so my voice is coming to you with some extra rasp today. But honestly, I kind of love that this is the episode it happened on because today's guest is someone I've been dying to talk to, and nothing was going to stop me from bringing you this conversation. In this episode, we get into some seriously thought-provoking territory, like what is enrichment really? Where did this concept come from and how has it evolved? We talk about ethical breeding and rescue practices, how our expectations of dogs can sometimes set them up to fail, and even what it's like to train wasps and spiders. Yes, really. Our guest has been in the animal welfare and behavior world since the 90s, working in shelters, vet clinics, wildlife rehabs, and with animals who have complex medical and behavioral needs. She's the co-author of Canine Enrichment for the Real World, a book that's become essential reading for anyone serious about supporting animal welfare. She's also the co-owner of Pet Harmony, and she mentors future behavior consultants and continues to push the field forward in all of the best ways. I am beyond thrilled to introduce you to today's guest, Emily Strong. And without further ado, let's get into it. Hello. Thank you again for making the time to be here with me. I'm so excited to meet you. And I feel like you and Allie's work has been really important for me and my journey becoming a trainer. So it's a full circle moment to meet you.
Hey, I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. And when I think of enrichment, obviously, I think of you and Allie as kind of being the voice of that and bringing it into a lot of pet parents' homes and just making that term more accessible for a lot of us. And first, I want to ask, how did you get into the whole concept of enrichment? And
Yeah.
yeah, how did that become your niche, so to speak?
Yeah. It was kind of a circuitous route, actually. Before I even was a behavior consultant, I was a veterinary technician for many, many, many years. And a friend of mine and I started an organization called Austin Parrot Society. I lived in Austin, Texas at the time. And so we were really focused on helping improve the welfare and well-being of parrots in the Austin area in Central Texas. And so we did a lot of educational opportunities and workshops and seminars and activities and things like that. And we ended up becoming a foster and rescue group too. That wasn't our initial intention, but people just kept dropping parrots on our doorstep, and suddenly we're a rescue group. So I did a lot of work. We worked a lot with Scott Eccles, who's an avian veterinarian who at the time lived in Austin. He doesn't anymore, but um, so Scott was really helpful to us in terms of helping us devise sustainable enrichment plans for all of the animals in our care, because we did not, neither Jamie nor I had a lot of money. And we weren't a nonprofit, so we couldn't get donations. So we were like, how can we take care of all these birds with the money that we have, which was almost nothing, right? If you're like super broke and suddenly you run a rescue group, how do you do that? And so Scott was really a lifesaver for us and helping us to learn about how zoos, aviaries, and aquaria think about enrichment and how they implement it. And he was the one who introduced me to Hal Markowitz and his work, and how he kind of was the one who took in the concept of enrichment out of the just sort of the scientists sort of messing around with stuff and being like, what happens when we give these animals things to do? Hal Markowitz was the one who took that out of just this purely experimental realm and made it really implementable in a really important and impactful way. So I knew about enrichment before I knew about training. That was my bedrock, my foundation for moving into the behavior field. And I moved into the behavior field because I was burned out. I worked in music full time and I worked as a tech full time, and I was doing this work with Austin Parrot Society. I was very burned out. I didn't love what I was doing in vet clinics and the way we were treating animals, and I hated the sort of ethos, the mantra that I had learned was you have to hurt them to help them, right? Like, yes, we're scaring them. Yes, they're angry at us. Yes, they're trying to bite us, but this is something necessary. And I really, really hated that. And so when I was 29, I just couldn't handle it anymore. And I heard about Susan Friedman's. She used to have this free parrot behavior course called Parrot Behavior Analysis Solutions, and I was broke, so free sounded great. And I took her that course, and I was like, this is what I want to do with my life. This is like behavior is fundamental to everything else that I do with animals. Like behavior is the crux of all of it. And it was like a spark went off in my head. It was like it was the most profound moment of my life of realizing that this was what I was meant to do. Um and so I actually started training in behavior with parrots and horses because I also at the time uh, worked with a horse rescue and I volunteered with them. It's a long story. We don't need to go into my life story, but um, so I didn't start in the dog training world, which means I didn't learn training through the dog training echo chamber. I learned about this through parrots and horses, and I was already coming into it with an enrichment lens, which means that I grew up in the training world as a behavior consultant, looking at everything through an enrichment lens. And I didn't realize that that wasn't typical until in 2013. Nope. Well, in 2013, I moved to Kanab and I started working at a Best Friends Animal Society or Sanctuary. In 2014, I transferred to the dog department, and that's where I met Allie. And that was my first exposure to like the dog training world. Like, it's not that I didn't have dog clients in Austin, it's that I wasn't a part of the dog training community. I saw
Hmm.
all species, I worked with all species, but I wasn't informed by the dog training echo chamber. And so in 2014, when I moved to the dog department and I started working with dogs, I was just operating the way I had always operated. And people were like, "What do you mean?" And I was like, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" And
Hmm.
it was such a weird, there was such a weird disconnect for me in the dog training world that that was not like that people thought of enrichment as like food puzzles and like how to keep dogs busy. And I was thoroughly confused by that mindset. And Allie had come from she got her degree was in animal science, and she had a professor who was really big on enrichment and had really kind of hammered home for her how important enrichment was as a part of just welfare and well-being in general. And so even though Allie did grow up in the dog training world, she'd had this academic exposure to enrichment as a fundamental means of providing animal welfare and well-being across species, because like in animal science you're mostly looking at livestock and stuff like farm animals.
Hmm.
So she also had that, so we sort of like met up at the sanctuary and we were like, oh my god, we're so aligned, like this is amazing. And it felt really important and validating to have somebody else who also sort of had like the confused crooked puppy head at like the way that the dog training world was looking at enrichment.
Yeah.
um so that became our primary focus. That was like the two of us, we were like, I mean, and we had two other, I don't want to in any way, I have to give a shout out to Ashley and Cherie, who are the other two people on our behavior team, and then later Glenn joined us. They were all incredible. I'm not in any way diminishing their expertise and their contributions. We worked really, really beautifully as a team. But the thing that Allie and I had in common was looking at behavior through an enrichment lens. So that's how we met up. Is that we shared that um, a feeling of being unmoored in a community where it's like, this isn't, how can this be about behavior and not be about enrichment? I don't understand how that works. Like, explain it to me like I'm
Yeah.
5. Like, what do you mean? So that's how we got to where we are.
Yeah, well, especially at a time where like the dog training industry was so much about like I don't know, just about control and all about these things too. I feel like that wasn't really a part of the conversation until much later. And then, like you were saying, everyone's understanding of enrichment was food puzzles and just throwing these things at them, and instead of
Yeah.
looking at it from that needs based lens. And
Yeah.
would you mind also explaining, just in case someone's joining us for the first time and they don't know what the word enrichment means? I'd love to
Yeah.
hear your definition of it as well.
Yeah, I mean we kind of we made a functional definition because there are so many definitions for enrichment. Nobody can really agree on what it means. Um and we wanted to make a definition that informed people about what they should be doing. So it's a very long definition, and then I'm going to tell you the shorter definition that we use now because we also have evolved in how we talk about it over the years. So the long functional definition that we came up with is enrichment means meeting all of an animal's needs so that they can be physically, behaviorally, and emotionally healthy enough to perform species typical behaviors in safe, healthy, and appropriate ways. So that definition kind of tells people what you should be doing about enrichment, but the shorter version, it kind of tells people how to think about enrichment, which is enrichment is about reducing harm and increasing welfare and well-being, right?
Hmm.
So Hal Markowitz, who, like I said earlier, was the guy who kind of took enrichment as a concept out of the experimental realm and into the practical application world, he said, the point of enrichment is that we're trying to make the animal's experience more like nature. So give them as much as possible an experience and an ability to move through the world the way they would if they were living in the wild, which I think is it's a really beautiful and important way to think about it. And also it is a way that has been misunderstood and misinterpreted for many decades.
Mm. I would love to hear, yeah, more about that too, because I know, at least for my understanding, is more coming from how you kind of started in the zoo community, but this could also be wrong, my understanding too. So
No,
I'd
yeah,
love
that's
to
correct.
hear,
Yeah.
okay, I would love to hear, yeah, the history of the term and our understanding of enrichment and that evolving.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to hear that from you as well.
Yeah. So Hal was a kind of like perfect storm of like time and place and expertise. Like he had this like confluence of situations. So um he he was working in from the 70s to the 90s, like those 3 decades is when he was really heavily doing the enrichment stuff. But in the 60s is when zoos started to shift their focus from just human entertainment to conservation. And for the first decade or so, the conservation efforts were abysmal failures because the animals were just living in these like concrete wastelands, is the term that Hal Markowitz used to describe
Hmm.
how animals lived in zoos. And his expertise, like the confluence of events for him, is he was at this time where zoos wanted to do better. They were aware that they needed to fix something, they didn't know how to fix it. And he had both experience studying animals and spending time with animals in the wild, observing wild behavior, and also working in zoos and studying and doing research in labs. So he had this like crossover of experience. So he was the one who was like, y'all, the reason that we're not doing well by these animals is because their lives look nothing like their lives in the wild. So he was the one who started working with zoos to like ask what can we do to construct these environments and routines for these animals that allow them to be the zebra-iest zebra and the giraffe-iest giraffe they can be in the confines of a zoo, right?
Hmm.
And that really was predicated on understanding their natural behaviors and what they did do in the wild so that we could set up environments to replicate that as much as possible. So that was his work, and it was really groundbreaking. And I mean, he's like my number one unsung hero. Like, you know, the thing, like if you could go back in time and have dinner with somebody, like he would be the guy
Yeah,
that I choose
yeah.
because like he really innovated this idea of giving animals agency to make choices in their own life and have behavioral diversity and have skills to navigate the world. And I think that's such a profound part of behavior
Hmm.
and training. Um, where that often gets misinterpreted is that if it's not natural, it's not enrichment. And so I've seen a lot of times people get very, very um, insistent that anything that isn't natural is bad. And that's not what more like nature means at all. We can't, I mean, it doesn't make sense, first of all, to try to make things exactly like nature because um, I don't know about you, but I don't want my cat to have to run from predators every day just because that's how they would live in nature. I
Hmm.
also don't want my dog to be like chasing down and hunting other animals every day because that's like nature. I don't want my animals to just live with parasites. And there are a lot of things that we can't replicate from nature because there are things like for example, parasite control in a natural environment often includes symbiotic behaviors with other species that we can't replicate in
Yeah.
captivity, right?
Hmm.
And then there's things like um a bird, birds, some bird species can fly 150 plus miles a day. We can't replicate that here. And also, it turns out that's actually not what they need to be physically, behaviorally, and emotionally healthy, right? Just because an animal does a certain behavior in a certain context and in that context is adaptive does not mean that that behavior is necessary for their welfare and well-being. So do see a lot of like people trying to be like just insisting like if it's not natural, it's not good. And this can look a lot of different ways. People who are really against training because training is unnatural, but that's not actually true, right? Training is just learning, and
Hmm.
animals learn and are taught by other members of their species in the wild. So, like, training is not unnatural. The way that we train in our environment is different from how they learned, how they acquire skills in the wild. But skill acquisition, can look like a lot of different things, right?
Hmm.
And then there are people who like really object to using any kind of like toys or plastics. Like you wouldn't see those in nature. And it's like, well, no, you wouldn't. And also, if you want to like try to plant a baobab tree in your backyard, go for it. You're probably going to
Right.
have a hard time with that, right?
Hmm.
So like I think that's where it gets misinterpreted a lot is this insistence on something being natural when we don't live in a natural environment. We just don't. Urban
Hmm.
communities are not natural for us either, and we adapt
Hmm.
to it. I was going to say just fine. We adapt to it to
It's like,
greater or
or
lesser
no.
degrees.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's thinking too about like enrichment for us and sometimes like getting to our roots of what's like a natural behavior for humans and how
Yeah.
that can help us feel good, but the limitations within that. And there's so much nuance to everything. And I always try
Yeah.
and stay away from the language of like good or bad or right or wrong. So I'm like, let's just look at like what's the like net outcome of this and is it like
Yes.
helping or hindering? And I love too that you're so good at like tracking data and talking about that and encouraging clients to almost become their own scientists of their own animals behavior and like that's my favorite thing I think I was inspired from you and Allie with it. It like coincided with some of the work I was doing and getting my master's of just like making your own inquiries and tracking that data, being curious instead of like always outsourcing things of like, oh, the
Mhm.
scientist knows everything that's correct. It's like, let's just have our own little inquiries here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
track it. Cool.
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole other topic of like how people think of science and that science has to
Mhm.
be done. Like, you can only do science if you have a PhD, and you can only do it if you have a lab
Mhm.
and if you get like research grants. And science is just a systematic way of learning, of knowing, right? It's just a way to gather information and use empirical observation to learn more about the world around us. So anybody can do it anywhere. You can be a citizen scientist, and also it
Mhm.
doesn't have to require a lot of like heavy data collection or like statistical models. Like it can
Right.
it can
Yeah.
just be tracking like what does your animal do and under what circumstances do they do it, and that is science. It's just a very simplistic version of it, right?
Totally. And I think once you get that like curiosity lens, it's so addicting, at least to me, of like looking at, wow, if we just change the environment in this subtle way, look at this change in behavior and like noticing these differences. And I love pointing that out to clients so then they can see their own like observations and curiosity. And it just like catapults from there. That's my favorite part of training is just how cool observation is. And then you like start to
Yeah.
notice, wow, like so much influences behavior. We're just one tiny facet amongst many, many things. So it's so cool.
Yeah, it really is. I
Uh,
love it. I love I love it, and also I'm fascinated by how it doesn't come naturally to us as humans. Like,
yeah,
it's
also
a
true.
skill that we have to learn.
Yeah, very true. Just with as with every anything. And one thing I thought too was cool, and I was looking into all the species you've worked with.
Hmm.
I knew about like your work with birds and so many different species of birds, which is so cool. But also I saw like an octopus, fish,
Yeah.
a spider, and wasps. And I was like, you have to tell me more about how you worked with a wasp. And did someone hire you to work with one wasp, or was it a bunch of wasps?
No, no, I nobody hired me. So the wasp was actually in my backyard. So we lived in Salt Lake at the time, and it was a really, really hot summer, really hot and really dry, which it's, it's the desert. It's always going to be hot and dry in the summer, but that summer was particularly bad. And I had, we have like, we did container gardening. And so every day I would go out and water our vegetables in the container. And there was a wasp that would hang out every day on the spigot, the water spigot outside. And I was really scared at first because wasps are one of the few insects that I'm actually scared of. Or actually, I'm less scared of them now that I've had this experience, but I would have like a visceral fear responses to wasps. So at first I was really scared, and then I just watched. I was like, you know how to do this. Like just watch, just observe behavior. And I noticed that the wasp was trying to get water from the spigot, which was very hot and dry. And I was like, oh, he's thirsty. That's what's happening. So I went inside, I got a glass of water, and I got one of the you know how like the plant, I don't know what they're called, but they're those like shallow terracotta dishes that you put a plant pot on and it's supposed
Hmm.
to catch the water. Whatever that thing is called, the little terracotta shallow dish. I poured some water in that terracotta dish and I held it up to the faucet, and a wasp immediately like flew over and started drinking. So I kind of walked a few feet away and set the terracotta down, and then I was able to like get water, put water in my watering can and water all the plants, and it was like no worries. So I just did it every day. I would come out and that wasp would be on the faucet, and I started moving the terracotta farther and farther away from the faucet, and the wasp would see me and fly over to the terracotta, and I would put it down. And then it got to where I would just take the water straight to the terracotta, leave it where it is on the patio, and pour the water in, and the wasp would come flying. And then about a month into it, I would come outside, the wasp would see me and would just immediately fly to the terracotta before I even got there.
Oh, cool.
And I was like, oh my God, I just trained this wasp to, to station. I did station training with a wasp. This
That
is
is
awesome.
awesome.
So then I did some research and I found that like wasps can actually recognize faces. So I was like, it's
Whoa.
not just a blob. I'm not just like a blob that predicts water. Like I'm the water person, right? And that I don't know why, like understanding how wasps think has really reduced my fear of them. But
Mhm.
because now I'm like, okay, they're not just like mindless killing machines. They can recognize you
Mhm.
and they can make decisions based on their history with you. And that like really reduced my fear of wasps. So
Yeah, that is
that's
so cool.
yeah, that's my wasp story. The
And you
spiders, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, 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 go ahead. Yeah, I wanna hear about the spiders too.
The spiders, I had a friend who had two tarantulas. They were two different fancy types. One was blue and one was pink, but I don't know their species. But in Austin that year, there was really bad wildfires. Like the fire map made a full ring around the city. Like it had just completely engulfed the surrounding areas of Austin. And so my friend had to temporarily move out of her house. Like she and her family had to move somewhere else because their house was in the path of the fire. And so um, I took care of her animals while they were temporarily displaced. And she showed me like when they're really comfortable, because she'd raised them since babies. She's like, if they're really comfortable with you, they'll sit on your hand. And she showed me like they would hang their legs off of the side of her hand and kind of just swing their legs, which was the cutest thing of my whole life, seeing a spider just like hanging out on a hand, just swinging their legs, like happy as can be. And so I didn't want to. I mean, they'd been with her since she was a baby, or since they were babies, not the human. Since the spiders were babies, not the human. Um, and and so I saw that relationship, and I was like, I'm not going to assume that they're ready for that now because I'm a stranger, but I want. That's my goal. It's like while they're staying with me, I want that for myself. So I would just put my hand down in their enclosure and um they would eat these little like baby freeze-dried crickets. Not freeze-dried, that doesn't make sense. They
Like
were
the I know what you're talking about, like the like, or maybe they're are they air dry? I know what you're talking about
but
though.
yeah, they would eat those, how whatever. So I would just put one on the heel of my hand and let them come, and I wouldn't try to pick up my hand at first, and then it like when they got to where I would put my hand down and they would just come before I even put the little cricket down, I would pick them up a little bit and then put them back down, and then I just kind of gradually picked them up a little more every day, and then I got to where I could just pick them up and they would hang out. And then like a week before she picked them up, they started doing the thing where they would like walk down in my hand and swing their legs off the ends. And I was like, I did
Oh my
it! Success! I
gosh.
was so proud of myself.
That is awesome. I
It
feel
was
like
so great.
a special type of like satisfaction probably comes, especially working with just like a species that you wouldn't think, I don't know, you just wouldn't think you could get anywhere with. I'd be like, I don't know, and then you get
Yeah.
there and you're like, yes, I did
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Yeah, I was very proud that I was able to like get to that point in the relationship before they went back home with their
Yeah,
family. So
I
that
would
was
be
fun.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
And then
and you oh no,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. I was
Oh,
just gonna say you brought up a really good point when you're talking about like how understanding the wasps like helped reduce your fear and that they weren't just
mhm.
like these bloodthirsty
Yeah.
monsters. And
Yeah.
I actually went to Africa for the first time this past summer, and we were
Oh, cool.
observing a lot of animals by the watering hole. And I remember, at least from TV, thinking a lot of these animals are just like bloodthirsty, kind
Yeah.
of a thing. And I was watching them and I was like, wow, their conflict resolution skills amongst each other was phenomenal. And I was like, this is
Yeah.
not what you see on TV. Like,
Yeah.
they're not just charging each other and like choosing these more aggressive behaviors. It was like the rhinos with the elephants, with the hyenas, with the lions, just intermingling, honestly, most
Yeah.
of the time pretty well. And I thought that was just really cool. I was like, wow, I think there's a misunderstanding in at
Yeah.
least our culture in the United States because we're more far removed, I think, from wildlife and the way that we live
Mhm.
currently. That we're like, oh my gosh, they just, if you run across a bear or any animal, they're just going to attack you. It's like,
Yeah.
no, they're going to look at you, observe you. And
Yeah.
everyone's trying to suss out like what you would do next if someone's like friend or foe or if you're neutral. and,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was like, I think we could learn a lot from nature of just watching other animals honestly be so observant. And it sounds like
Yeah.
that was what really helped you with the wasps too, is just like observing and
Yes.
like helping that kind of reduce, yeah, your fear through that. So I was like, I just thought that was a cool full circle moment for me too, because I just thought some animals would just be like charging you blindly. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's a rhino,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
I
then that's
mean,
how they act.
I think I think our perception about the way animals behave is not entirely, but largely shaped by what we see on TV.
Hmm.
Because, like, unfortunately, behavioral health is about as interesting to watch as like paint drying on the walls, right? It doesn't make for good TV, and so what TV does is it selects the moments of high drama, and that's even true for nature documentaries. I mean, it's true for reality
Hmm.
TV. Like, reality TV profits on people, humans being at their worst behavior, and
Hmm.
I think that's true for nature documentaries as well. It's not, I don't think it's for the same reason. as, reality TV does it with humans, but I think they are waiting to show people something of like, this is what it looks like. But we are seeing one moment in maybe like a whole year of that animal's life, right? Or it may be
Mm-hmm.
like the worst moment of that animal's life. And because that's all we see on these nature documentaries, we just think that that's how they are. And, I, I, I have big feelings about that because
Mm-hmm.
if people think that animals are mindless killing machines, they're going to come in hot in their interactions. And then they're the reasons that the animals are reacting the way they are. And then it's a confirmation bias. It's like, well, see, we
Yep.
interacted with this animal and they were hostile. It's like, well, yeah, because you came in guns blazing. Of course they're going to react defensively to that, right? But
Right.
I felt the same way about bears. When I lived in Texas, I was terrified of bears. And I was like, I don't know how anybody can hike in places where bears are because I had this picture in my head of bears just being like attacking humans all the time. When I moved to Utah and we're like hiking in the forests up there in the mountains, we saw so many bears. And here in Washington, I see so many bears. And they're like, usually when I see them, it's a flash of their butt as they're like hauling away from me. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
they
Right.
don't
Yeah.
want to interact with you. And so now I see a bear and I'm like, oh my God, there's a bear.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. You're like,
Like
this is so special. Yeah.
it's so special. I saw a bear today, right?
Yep.
Because like now that I have more experience with them, I'm like, oh, they won't kill on sight. Like that's not,
Right.
and it makes sense. I mean, if you think about it, like it makes sense because conflict is expensive. And if all wild
Mm-hmm.
animals were just constantly trying to kill everything, nothing would have evolved. We wouldn't have ecosystems if everything was a bloodbath all the time, right? It
Yeah.
makes sense that conflict is a last resort or it only happens in very specific contexts.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a big learning curve for me for sure.
Yeah, no, and I agree. And I feel like now that I have the eyes to see nature documentaries differently than I once did, I feel very similarly, where I'm like, okay, this is a story that is being portrayed that is not necessarily accurate. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, however they wanted to film the story, right? And a lot of it is not filmed at the same time. And it might not even be the same animal, but they're telling the story like it is. It's just a lot of
Yeah.
fabrication to have it be interesting to watch.
Yeah.
And yes, there can be good that comes from it of people caring about a species that, might need some conservation efforts behind it, but
Yeah.
also on the unintended side effects or consequences of it being like now we have this perception of what I don't know, sharks are like or cheetahs are like or
Right.
whatever that might be that is not totally accurate. And when I got to watch a lot of these animals in the wild, I was just blown away at how I thought it was so beautiful, their conflict resolution strategies and the relationships and social complexities they had amongst each other. I was like, I mean, I was seeing it through my own confirmation bias. That was what I wanted to see, but I thought I saw that.
Yeah.
And I see that a lot of times, even in dogs, where I think it's a skill where some
Hmm.
dogs are really good at mitigating or reducing conflict amongst others, and some are really good at kind of amping up the conflict, similar to people.
Yeah.
And so I just thought that was interesting. And I try and encourage my clients to see this through this lens as well of like, okay,
Yeah.
dogs have different social skills just like we do. And some
Hmm.
people come into conversations a little spicy or
Yeah.
struggling to regulate a little bit more than others. And some are really good at diffusing conflict
Yeah.
amongst others. And yeah, I just think we don't give animals enough credit, I think,
Right.
at their social skills.
Well, and I think the other way that humans and non-humans have a lot of similarities is that social skills are cultural too,
Hmm.
right? And so we have dogs who were raised in pet homes in the United States, whose only interaction with other dogs may be the dogs in their house or like other dogs in their like puppy classes or whatever. Their culture, the culture of the American pet dog, the urban American pet dog, is very, very different than the culture of even rural American pet dogs, and much less rural dogs from other countries, street dogs, feral dogs, right?
Hmm.
And so I think we see that a lot. Like, I've worked with a lot of shelters and rescues around the country, and one of the things that I've seen like a recurring theme of is shelters feeling really judgmental towards people in rural areas because they let their dogs wander, like roam.
Mm-hmm.
And my response to that is if you're looking at it through an enrichment framework, you're looking at met needs and unmet needs. And you can see that, like, maybe our urban pet parents are better at meeting some needs. Like, I think we're better at meeting their like veterinary, physical health needs, their grooming needs. Um, maybe they're better at, maybe arguably we're better at safety.
Mm-hmm.
um, Not necessarily better at security though, because urban dogs are real anxious.
Yeah.
um, but when you look at these rural dogs, they have, by and large, much better interspecific social skills. They are much better at independence. They're much better at security. Um, so instead of thinking of it like we're going to come in and educate you folks who aren't doing as good of a job at enriching your animals, if we look at it as let's exchange knowledge and skills so that we both come out of this better. And if we help you with your medical stuff, can you help us figure out how do you get those rural dogs to be so good with other dogs, right?
Mm-hmm.
And obviously that's not true everywhere. I've worked with rural dogs that have terrible social skills. Yes, there are outliers, but I'm talking about cultural trends. I'm not making a sweeping generalization, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that mindset really helps people be more effective because it shifts their viewpoint from like, we're coming in to rescue these dogs from these people who are doing it wrong to let's have this mutual exchange of ideas and information where we'll help you with what you need and you can help us with what we need. And I
Mm-hmm.
find that it's better for everybody, right? Because a lot of times the outcome of that is that we don't save the dogs by dragging these dogs who have enormous freedom and skill out of their environment and putting them into an urban space where they have no control. That
Mm-hmm.
is not a value add for a lot of those dogs, right?
Yeah, I completely agree. It makes me like sad sometimes
Yeah.
and I one thing I love about traveling is watching the dogs in any community that I'm in and just observing like how different it might be from our culture and community.
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of free roaming dogs are so emotionally happy and healthy of like look like I just came from Costa Rica too and I was like these dogs were getting to run wherever they wanted, dig up crabs. They had friends. I even watched them have like it appeared like romantic relationships too
Yeah,
where I was
yeah,
like
they
this
do.
is wild. Yeah, and like they had friends, romantic relationships, dogs they felt neutral about, some dogs they didn't like,
Hmm.
people that they gravitated towards. They defended some areas from other dogs, let some other
Yeah.
dogs in. I was like this is just fascinating and had their favorite napping areas and it was like they get to make so many choices and we're
Yes.
thriving. I was like this if I was a dog, this is where I'd want to be. And
Yeah.
so many times we'll be like they need to be rescued, that's sad. And it's like I think also looking at things from just different cultural lenses too. And
Hmm.
I feel like we also do this with any conservation project. It's like we think we know what's best as Americans and going into these other
Yeah.
countries being like, I'm gonna like rescue these animals instead of learning from the
Yeah.
like locals of like what has been done that has worked really well. And there's so many more stories that you can
Right.
unpack when you reveal these layers. And even like learning from indigenous cultures, you can pick up so much from that
Yeah.
too. So I think it's an important lesson of like remembering that we don't know what's best, even though sometimes we think we do, or we might know what's best in our culture. And then you
Yeah.
change the environment and it can change drastically. And yeah, such a
Absolutely.
good
Yeah.
reminder for that.
Yeah. I have a friend. Her name is Tina Patel. She runs Dogland in Orlando, Florida. And she's Kenyan born of Indian descent. So she spent like 20, not 20 decades, 20 years, 2 decades, 20 years, um, s- um, studying just dogs who live out in the wild unfettered, street dogs, and then like dogs who just live out in the wild, in Kenya and India. And since then she's branched out and she started observing dogs in other countries for about the past 10 years. She's also been like going to Guatemala and other places, and she just observes all of these dogs who are minimally influenced or impacted by humans, And I mean, I've learned a lot from her, and she's kind of blown my mind in a lot of different ways. But one of the things that she said that left the deepest impression on me is that we have this idea of like dogs mating being very perfunctory and not very like, you know, the dude dogs kind of picking their mate and fighting for vying for the female, whatever.
Hmm.
And she was like, that's not how it works at all. Like the females have so much control, and the dogs go through this courtship process that can be really long, like prolonged, and the female picks her mate, and then they pair up, and then they often co-parent. And she said that she's seen over seasons that even though what not during mating season, they'll often kind of go off and be individual dogs again. That she would see that each mating season, several of the pairs would repair up again. So there's a relationship between them where the female had so much choice and control, and she chose her mate, and they choose to continue being together. And that blew my mind because the only time I've seen dogs interacting that way has been in these breeding contexts where it's really controlled by
Hmm.
humans.
Yeah.
It's a very different experience, right?
Totally. Yeah. Well, and it, I think, would maybe reveal something that people might feel uncomfortable about of like the ways that we've been going about breeding animals ethically
Hmm.
being wrong. If you're looking at like, okay, does the female actually like consent to these things? And I feel like
Yes.
people don't look at animals as having the emotional intelligence enough for those things to be true. And I'm like, I've always struggled with watching like I don't know, just
Yeah.
stereotypical breeders doing things like that or I don't it just felt icky to me where I'm like, I don't
Yes.
know. I feel like we're not giving them enough credit and again, they don't have that agency and even for like
Yeah.
horses, I'm like if you're having to
Yeah.
tie them down, that feels really wrong. Like
Mm-hmm.
yeah, where I'm like I don't think I could look past that personally
Yeah.
and I think when you can see that animals can like choose partners and things like that, you're like, wow, what else? I don't know, it just like it allows
Yes.
you to almost see yourself more in them and empathize more.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that people struggle with a little bit is
Yeah.
empathizing with species that feel so different from which probably just ties into our our like speciesism or I don't know the word I'm
Yeah.
looking for, but where we have
Yeah.
the bias, you know what I mean?
Uh, we can call it our umwelt, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I so it's interesting because I recently got a Basenji puppy, and one of the reasons that I chose my breeder is because she's also a dog trainer, and I met her through like a local dog training group. And when she was talking about her process with breeding, is they don't just like pair these two dogs up and make it happen and call it a day. She'll go spend a week or more with the whoever has the other dog. And then for this pairing, she had the sire, and she flew to Arizona to stay with a friend of hers who had the dam. And she was like, I don't know if this is actually going to result in a breeding because we let the dogs get to know each other, and then they have to choose if it has to be a love match, is how she phrased it,
Oh,
which I thought
cool.
was really
Yeah.
cute.
I love that.
And she was like,
Yeah.
so if it's not a love match, it's not going to happen. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh my God, I love you so much. And so that's what they did. They spent a week together, and they just let the dogs hang out, and the dogs chose each other. It was a love match. Um, so that to me was like, this is how it should be done. Like
Yeah.
this is more like nature if we're talking about Hal Markowitz, right?
Mhm.
They were allowed to go through a courtship period where they chose each other, and that is that is enrichment based breeding as far as I'm concerned, right?
Yeah, I've never even thought about that terminology, enrichment-based breeding, but that is such a like valid point, bringing it like full circle too, where you're like, yeah, making it more natural of how that would actually happen. That's yeah,
Yeah.
that just like blew my mind. So I guess like my next question would be so for like people trying to think about getting a dog from a breeder, something I struggle with is helping them kind of vet out ethical breeders because I think it's a
Hmm.
subjective word and
Hmm.
a lot of people are using things as like marketing strategies. So
Right.
do you have
Yeah.
any tips to help people decipher like breeders that might be doing things more from that enrichment framework or what to look
Yeah.
out for?
I mean, I'm gonna slightly change your question And
Sure.
I'm gonna say if you're whether you're deciding to adopt a dog or buy a dog from a breeder, these are the things you need to keep in mind because I think the idea that breeding is less ethical than rescue is a I'm just going to say it a gross misunderstanding
Yeah.
of welfare and well-being, because either can be ethical or unethical, and there's that's a whole spectrum, like a multidimensional spectrum of what do we mean by ethical, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I mean the first thing I want to say is that being a perfectionist is not going to get you anywhere because it's very hard for any of us to get everything absolutely perfectly right all of the time. And we have to remember that everybody, whether we're talking about breeders or shelters or rescue groups, are operating under constraints, very real financial, time, staffing, resource, bandwidth, knowledge, skill constraints, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I am looking at is in general is if we're thinking about enrichment as reducing harm and improving welfare and well-being, is that the net outcome of whatever they're doing? Is the net outcome harm reduction and improving the welfare and well-being of the animals in their care? So that gives a lot of latitude for people to not be perfect,
Mm-hmm.
while still supporting the people who are doing a really good job and doing everything that they can to do it as best as possible, right?
Mm-hmm.
So within that framework or that understanding, I'm looking for physical, behavioral, and emotional health, right?
Yeah.
And I'm looking for places that give the animals as much choice and control as possible. So on the breeding side, that looks like, are we doing health screening? Are we making sure that we're breeding animals who are behaviorally healthy, or as behaviorally healthy as possible? Like if you have an animal that is like chronically detrimentally anxious, don't breed that animal. Because yes,
Mm-hmm.
I have no doubt that some of that is learning history, and also that is there are some genetic traits, and also you have to think about the fact that so much of behavior is influenced by prenatal development and their prenatal environment, and if they are living inside of an anxious animal, they are more likely to
Mm-hmm.
come out anxious, right? If you have an animal who chooses conflict at the drop of a hat, please don't breed
Right.
that animal, right? So when I say behaviorally healthy, I'm not saying that the animal has to be perfect. Nobody has to be perfect, right? One of my favorite dogs in the world who puts out really good puppies, she's a little bit resource guardy, but not, it's not, she's not dangerous, right?
Mm-hmm.
And her resource guarding is highly contextual and you can have negotiations with her. I think it's fine. She can have puppies, right?
Mm-hmm.
None of us are perfect. Like I think, most humans are going to be a little resource guardy about something.
Oh
It's
yeah.
okay. It's okay for her to be a little resource guardy. That's very different than intentionally breeding a dog who has crippling anxiety or who is has a multiple bite history under their belts,
Yeah.
so we're looking at like screening for health and physical health and behavioral health from the get-go. And then we're looking at how are they socializing the puppies? Are they preparing the puppies for the world so that the puppies have the best chance of thriving in the environment that they're going to live in? Which means if it's a rural working dog, that socialization is going to look very different than if it's a Maltese in a condo, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
So there's not one right way to socialize. It's, are you socializing that animal for the environment they're going to live in? Are you equipping them with the skills they need to thrive in that environment? And for, on the other hand, for adult dogs, whether it's breeders who had to take back an adult dog and is rehoming it, or whether we're talking about shelter or rescue, obviously the socialization isn't a part of it. But are we supporting, and to the best of our ability, their physical, behavioral, and emotional health? Are we
Mm-hmm.
giving them as much agency as possible? Are we making decisions that support the physical, behavioral, and emotional health and safety and security of everybody involved, not just that dog, But bearing in mind post adoption realities, is that dog going to be safe and secure in that household? Are the humans involved going to be safe and secure? How
Yeah.
about the neighbors? How about the other animals in that environment? Right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's the lens through which I view it, is like whether we're talking about rescue or breeding, are we supporting physical, behavioral, and emotional health to the best of our ability? And are we giving them as much choice and control as possible?
Yeah, no, that's such good points. And in the discernment of risk of the individuals responsible for, like, I guess, putting that animal out into society. I used to work at a shelter too, and that was a really big topic of that we'd all talk about together was, yeah,
Hmm.
if a trainer had this dog, they could potentially be successful, but we have to recognize that the general public does not
Yeah.
have the same skill set. And that's
Yeah.
not the reality of the situation. And is it fair for someone with a huge heart that's trying to save an animal to then have potentially a ticking time bomb that they're living with that could also get out if their level of risk is not the same as ours
Yeah.
would be for a scenario. So it's a yeah, a good point to bring up. And even just understanding everyone's bandwidth of shelter workers or breeders or the people that are bringing home an animal, their bandwidth and their resources are going to look different.
Yeah.
And I think yeah, getting rid of that like perfectionist standpoint is huge because even in the work that I do and the clients I support, so many times it's like, is this right or wrong? Is this good or bad? I don't feel good enough. I'm like, what is good enough for you is going to change every single day because our
Yeah.
bandwidth changes every day. And
Yeah.
having that flexibility or acquiring some skills that have a big payoff of like this helps the dog out and me to get our needs met simultaneously.
Yes,
It'd
exactly.
be really
Yeah.
helpful. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I have such big feelings about that because of my background and where Allie and I came from. I just have the reason we named the book Enrichment for the Real World, or the book
Mhm.
Canine Enrichment for the Real World and the podcast Enrichment for the Real World, is because we have to think about the real world. It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if when people start with like, if we could just find XYZ home for this animal, it would be
Yes.
fine. If you start a sentence, if we could just, I'm going to just shut that down because like it doesn't
Yeah.
matter. It doesn't, what if
Yeah.
does not matter. That's not a reality, right?
Mhm.
In the
Mhm.
real world, this animal is not safe or secure and we cannot meet their needs or the needs of others. We have to make decisions based on the real world, not on our pie in the sky if onlys, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And
which is such a huge part, I feel like, for behavior consulting too. It's like we don't have the right answer, quote unquote, all of the time. It's helping
yeah.
people come up with a collaborative answer, I think is the most important and the most sustainable aspect from them. And so many people are like, "Oh, you're the trainer, like you know, just tell us what to do." And a
Hmm.
lot of times I'm like, "Let's just throw that question like kind of right back at people and help us as a collective come up with a solution and also
Yeah.
trying to get the animal's perspective and input
Hmm.
on outcomes and solutions too and helping people
Yes.
see that I think is at least my favorite part of my job is like all right let's helping everyone just being able to communicate or unpack that language
Yeah.
of a different species I think is fun
Yeah.
but on that same note too, since you work with so many different species, I'm assuming sometimes you come across a species you've never worked with before.
Hmm. Yeah.
What do you find like most helpful to guide you through a new species? Like, because I
Yeah.
obviously needing to be aware of different sensories that they have and a different perception of the world, but yeah, what tools or strategies do you do to set yourself up for success with different
Yeah.
species?
Um, I First thing I do is go learn about the natural history of that species. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, learn about their, like you said, what their sensory realities, their umwelt, right? And also learn about their natural behaviors. I may or may not look at an ethogram. I look at their diet, not just what they eat, but how they eat it. So I want to learn about what that animal's life is like in the wild. And then in terms of observing body language, even if I don't know the body language of a species, you can get pretty far by just paying attention to tension.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So I don't need to know the ins and outs of mongoose body language or Vietnamese pot-bellied pigs body language to be able to see when I see tension in their face or around their eyes, when I see their hackles raised or piloerection,
Hmm.
to see when they're kind of legs out really stiff and straight versus when they're more relaxed. So when I'm introducing myself to that animal, I give them lots of space. I usually start through protected contact. If if I'm able to do that, I will choose protected contact at first. I'll do a lot of just observing what tense looks like to them, what relaxed looks like in their bodies. And then we'll talk through, because the good thing about like behavior is that like behavior is behavior across species, right?
Hmm.
Analysis applies to all species. So if you can marry what you know about behavior analysis and training with what you know about the ethology of that species and what you're observing in terms of their tension or relaxation, you can actually get a whole lot done. You can get a whole lot done. And then the more you work with that animal, the more that you learn about
Hmm.
their body language, and you start to realize that like this little like grimace means they are anticipating food, right? Like
Yeah,
as you learn
yeah.
more, the more you know about them. I mean, the more that you spend time with them, the more you know about them. So that's typically my approach. And what I have found really interesting is that I haven't had I've I'm gonna change how I say that. I have found it easier to work with new exotic species that I've never met before than a lot of dogs, because
Interesting.
people who have these exotic pets don't have the same expectations of those animals
Mm,
that people have of dogs.
such
And
a good
so
point.
so much of what I do with it, like I did have a mongoose client. I have had a few pot-bellied pig clients, right? Those were real examples. And for them, I mean, I give them an enrichment plan that alleviates their pain points and meets their needs and their pets' needs, and they're happy,
Hmm.
right? Whereas people are like, I want my dog to heal. I want my dog to be good at a dog park. I want to be able to take him to the bar. I want my dog to come when called every single time. And it's like,
Yeah,
I get that that's what you want. You want that because it's a dog.
right.
And if you had an almost any other species, you would not have those expectations. And it's cool. If those are your goals, I can help you reach those goals. But I think you don't understand how much training is involved in that and how much work you're going
Yeah.
to do to achieve those results. And then people are like, well, I don't want to do that work. I just want you to make it happen. And I'm like, you gotta
Hmm.
pick your poison, baby. You either have to do the work or you have to lower your expectations, but you can't have your cake
Yeah.
and eat it too here,
Oh,
right?
no, so true. And so much too. I'm like, let's get to unpacking. Like, why do you feel that you need your dog to
Yes.
do that? And where is that coming from within? And like unpacking that, is it like, oh, I wouldn't feel good enough unless I have
Yes.
that? Or I don't know. What is the real root cause of you wanting that behavior
Yes.
from your dog too is interesting. And yeah, you bring up
Exactly.
really, really good points. I also want to be respectful of your time. I know we're coming up on time. Before we finish up, though, I have some like fun rapid fire questions. If you're
Okay.
into that, if you're
Let's
down, I
do
feel like
it.
it'd be
Yeah.
fun. Okay, let me just pull it up really quick. All right. So, favorite species to work with?
Humans.
Ooh, same, same. A training myth you wish would just die.
That you can fix. Well, I'm gonna pick two. I'm gonna rebel and pick two. The extremes about species and breed determinism, that either you can train everything or that like they are the way they are because of how they look, like their shape or their species or their breed. Both of those, I need them to die.
Mhm.
It's not
Oh,
like that, like you can do anything through training who strengthens you, or it is the way that they are, the way they are because they look the certain way. Both of those things need to die.
I love that. Okay. And then what's one species that leveled up your skills the most?
Ugh. Um, God, that's really hard. Um, yeah, I'm gonna say like n not one species, but just in general, parrots have been really challenging because they are very um fast. They have very fast reaction times, and they're always kind of two steps ahead of you. Um,
Mm.
and they are incredibly smart and sensitive, and also they can break your bones. So
Yeah. Fair. You're like, that would level up your skills for sure.
yeah.
Perfect combo.
Yeah.
All right, and then I got 3 more for you. So the
Yeah.
next one's, what's one unexpected enrichment activity you think more people should try?
Um, ooh, this is a good question. I'm gonna have to think about it for a second though.
Sure.
I okay. I think more people should do scent work with dogs, but also with other species. I
Mhm.
think people should find what the predominant sense of that species is, and do find out how to do a different version of scent work. So I've done sound
Mm.
work, I've done sight work, where we're taking the principles of scent work, but we're applying it to the primary sense of that species. I wish more people would play around with that.
I love that. Okay, and then if you could make everyone read one book that wasn't yours, what would it be?
The Stress Factor in Dogs by Christina Spalding.
Ooh, that's a good one. I'll put that in the show notes too. And then what keeps you going in this field, especially when things feel heavy?
I love um, empowering learners of all species. I I still, after all this time, I still get goosebumps when I see a learner, whether it's one of my students in Pet Pro or whether it's an animal that we're working with, when I see them step into their own power and realize that they can influence things and change things and make things happen. I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it.
Yeah, I love
That's it.
that. I love it. Well, thank you so much for spending your time with us. And
Yeah.
yeah, again, I'm so grateful that you're here. And if you wouldn't mind just sharing briefly where people could find more of you if they want to work
Yeah.
with you, either as someone who has a pet that they'd like support with, or if someone's a pet professional wanting some support, where can they find you?
I would love to. Our website is petharmonytraining.com. I don't work with clients in person anymore, or at all. I don't work with clients, private clients anymore. I do, however, oversee the cases of our consulting team. So any of our consultants, all of our consultants are incredible, and I have eyeballs on their cases anyway. So if for private clients, when you go to petharmonytraining.com, you'll see the section for private client services. For professionals, our mentorship program is called Pet Pro, which stands for the Practice of Enrichment and Training for Professionals. And that's also on our site, petharmonytraining.com. You can see where you can choose that. It's on the homepage. You can choose private client services or professional services. So it's really easy to pick them.
Perfect.
And then our social, we have a Pet Harmony Training on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and I think Pinterest. Maybe TikTok. I think
Perfect.
maybe we have TikTok too.
Yeah, hitting all the platforms.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again. Thanks for hanging out with me on the Co-Regulated Canines podcast. If you love this episode, it would mean the world to me if you subscribed, left a review, and shared with a friend. Your support helps more people and their dogs find a little more ease and connection in their lives. Want to dive deeper? Follow me on Instagram at Co-Regulated Canines. That's CO_regulated, the letter K, the number 9, S, or head to www.coregulatedcanines.com for more resources. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of your pup, and keep building those connections.